3 of the top 4 teams in Sunday's newest AP poll are squads from the Big Ten, but I don't need a poll to tell me that. I know that the top teams in college football reside in the old B1G. That and reacting to all things Week 8 as we take a trip around this big old nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
Do you have college football playoff fever? I know I do. It's starting to set in because the stretch run is starting to set in. Now that we've gotten past the halfway point of this college football season, a lot of people are starting to try to ask these questions. Who are the top teams in college football? Who are the national championship contenders? How many teams are some of these conferences going to get into this postseason 12-team tournament that we call the college football playoff? Before this weekend, a lot of people were looking at the Big Ten Conference maybe only as a 3-bid league. Now, those 3 teams are sitting at the top of the sport, certainly right now. More on that in just a little bit. But you throw Indiana into the mix and how good they're looking right now, all is right in the world, and this might be a 4-bid league when all is said and done for the Big Ten in the college football playoff. Now, answering some of those questions, who are the top teams in college football? Who are some of those championship contenders? Well, after watching this weekend of college football, it is pretty clear to me that I think the best teams in the country reside in the Big Ten Conference. Believe it or not, I had one eye on Texas and Georgia on Saturday night. Now, I had the other eye certainly on Iowa and Michigan State, of course. But when I was watching that Longhorns-Bulldogs matchup, I thought back to how I felt before that game took place. I thought Texas was the best team in the country. I thought they were excellent at the quarterback position. They had good weapons on the outside. They were really good in the trenches as well. I watched Texas beat down Michigan, and I kind of had my eye on them early in the season, and they just looked like a well-oiled machine under Steve Sarkisian. But then I looked at how that really good Georgia defense shut them down in the first half of that football game, and that may be clear number one thought that I had in my head about the Burnt Orange certainly started to fade away, and you saw the result with the Bulldogs winning on the road 30-15. And then you look at Georgia. This is a team that lost to Alabama, who I don't think is all that great so far this season. And when I look at the Georgia Bulldogs, Carson Beck doesn't really jump off the page, right? There are quarterbacks, plural, in my opinion, that are better than Carson Beck right now. I know the defense is really good, but overall as a team, this team for Georgia just doesn't really pop to me. Personally, and a lot of people said that with maybe Texas and Georgia, those were maybe 2 of the best teams in the country going at it on the field. Personally, I think that we've seen the best 2 teams in college football go at it on a football field. And it happened October 12th, and it happened in Eugene, Oregon. I think the Oregon Ducks and the Ohio State Buckeyes are the top 2 teams in college football. As we stand at this moment in time with Halloween just on the horizon, I think the Buckeyes and the Ducks are just more complete football teams than our SEC counterparts. I think the top of the Big Ten right now is stronger than the top of the SEC. And then you have that team that's ranked number 3 in the country. You have that Penn State team. Now, I think Oregon and Ohio State are certainly national championship contenders. You got the Nittany Lions there. They're undefeated. They're ranked number 3 in the latest AP poll. I think this is a Penn State team that is really, really good, and we're going to find out if they're great or possibly elite in the next 2 weeks. They go on the road to a raucous environment and a team that's feeling really good in the Wisconsin Badgers this Saturday, and then they play the Ohio State Buckeyes in State College. This is the stretch where we're going to really find out what this Penn State team is made out of. Now, one team that's not on this graphic that deserves to be talked about when we talk about the Big Ten being really good at the top is the Indiana Hoosiers. What an impressive win over the Nebraska Cornhuskers, 56-7 on Saturday. And folks, not only teams in the Big Ten, we talked at the top of the segment, it was about the college football playoff. And what did we just talk about? The Big Ten has better top teams right now, in my opinion, than the SEC. Indiana is a team that people around the country should start to fear because they are built so well and they are such an experienced team. They have all of the makings that if they get into this postseason tournament, they can certainly make a run. Now, these next few games are going to be very interesting without Curtis Rourke. Indiana said he's going to be out indefinitely, but he is going to return within the 2024 regular season. The good thing for Indiana is you got a guy in Taven Jackson that's pretty talented. A lot of people forget this was a 4-star quarterback coming out of high school in the state of Indiana. He went to Tennessee. They had a pretty crowded quarterback room, so he came back to IU, was not all that great last season, but then in the second half when he came in for Curtis Rourke against Nebraska, he looked pretty good. I have confidence that IU is going to be able to get through this stretch because they're such a balanced team. This is a team that has a really good run game. This is a team that has a variety of weapons. And if you can just manage Taven and get him to put the ball in the right spots at the right time and protect the ball and not turn the football over, this is an Indiana team that is going to be fine against Washington. They're going to be fine against Michigan State. They're probably going to be fine against Michigan if Taven Jackson is starting. And now their eyes really start to focus on the Ohio State Buckeyes. The balance and the experience, I think, is what impresses me the most about Indiana. And if you're not a believer now, you probably should be, because this team can do it. What have we said before? They can beat you any way they choose to beat you. IU can certainly do it with the run. They can do it with the throw. And they've got some good players, and they got a good unit also on the defensive side of the football. And now let's transition from one I school to another, and let's talk about the Iowa Hawkeyes for a minute. They're coming off a 32-20 loss to Michigan State on Saturday night. And what do we know about Iowa? What do we know about Kirk Ferentz? What do we know about Phil Parker? This is usually a great to elite defense in the Big Ten. It's one of the best defenses year in and year out in the Big Ten, and that plays into the formula for Iowa Hawkeye football. I just don't think they have that this year. I just don't think that this Iowa defense is great. I think it's good. I think it's really good, but I think there's some parts of this Hawkeye defense that are maybe holding them back and thus holding the team back and thus holding the formula of Iowa Hawkeye football back. Check out these two stats regarding the last game against the Michigan State Spartans, which they lost. It's the first game since the 2013 Ohio State game where the opposing team did not punt. That's right. They kicked a lot of field goals, Michigan State did, but they did not punt the football away. Turns out, not punting is winning. Pro Football Focus had not one, not two, not three, but 19 missed tackles for the Iowa Hawkeyes. That's not very Phil Parker-like. That's not very Iowa-like. Just a handful of missed tackles for the Michigan State Spartans on the other side. Joe Rossi, by the way, is doing a really good job with this Michigan State defense. Now, I talked about that Iowa formula. Okay, this is an offense that is still lagging behind quite a bit. Okay, I know Caleb Johnson has certainly stepped up and provided them some more explosive plays in the run game, and they're really leaning on him. And I think that they have certainly taken steps up from that basement, from that floor that Iowa had been at the last few seasons. But the formula is that this defense is keeping them in these close games where it's 17-13, where it's 16-10. Check out the graphic. They've allowed 20-plus points in 4 out of their 7 games. When the offense is not able to generate points and the defense allows that kind of production, that's not the formula. It doesn't mix well. The defense needs to be at that level. I think a big reason why the defense isn't at that level is because they don't have a Riley Moss and they don't have a Cooper DeJean. Now, I know Sebastian Castro was not available. He was out for this game against Michigan State. He's at that cash hybrid position for Iowa, and that was certainly a big loss. He's certainly one of the best players on this team, one of the best defenders on this team. But I look to these corner spots. Jamari Harris, I think, is solid, but you look at the other side, you look at the TJ Halls, you look at the John Nestors, that's a pretty steep drop-off, I think, for where the Iowa corners have been. You look at the teams that have had success against Iowa this season. You look at Iowa State and what they were able to do earlier this season in that 20-19 win. They were able to hit explosive plays over the top. Speaking of Iowa, there's another team that was in the Big Ten championship game last year that's very Iowa-like this season, and it's the Michigan Wolverines. I think that this team has taken more steps down than anticipated. Look, we knew out of all of the personnel, coaching-wise and players-wise, that this team, of course, was going to take steps down. But I think the expectation coming into this season for Michigan was, okay, let's get serviceable Cade McNamara or Wilton Spate type of play at the quarterback position. Let's be good and maybe not great on the offensive line because of all of those players that they were leaving. But hey, let's rely on these four-star guys that they were able to recruit, these younger guys. They got Josh Preeb transferring in from Northwestern. Hey, let's let this offensive line gel together and let's let the run game be elite. And let's let the defense be elite. I think why this Michigan team is where they are and sitting at 4-3 is because those units that we expected to be elite and maybe carry this football team haven't been elite. And the quarterback play has been worse, I think, than everybody expected. This is bad quarterback play right now that's going on in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And you put that all together, and it's a recipe for what you got right now, sitting at 4-3, looking like an Iowa team of the past few seasons. Now, here's where things really start to get scary for Michigan. You're sitting at 4-3, and now you're playing a 4-3 Michigan State team this week in Ann Arbor. A Michigan State team that is coming off a big win against the Iowa Hawkeyes. If Michigan can't get it done against Michigan State, this fan base is not going to react well. And the last thing I kind of want to finish up with is, if this is what it looks like this year for Michigan, what's it going to look like next year when Kaleo Mullins ain't here, when Donovan Edwards ain't here, when Kenneth Grant ain't here, when Mason Graham ain't here, when Josiah Stewart and Colston Loveland and all of these big pieces that were a big part of a national championship team last season, what happens when they're not here next season? I think that's the really spooky part as we get closer to Halloween for the Michigan Wolverines. Now, we talked about some negatives. Let's get to some positives. The Wisconsin Badgers are really starting to turn the corner as a football team. And it all started after that loss to USC. There were a lot of segments across the Badger fan base that were not feeling good about this program. Myself may have been included in that segment, but ever since then, the teams that played in that game between USC and Wisconsin have gone in completely opposite directions. The Trojans are 0-3, and the Badgers are 3-0. Wisconsin is 3-0 because their defense is really starting to hit their stride. But that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Luke Fickell and Mike Tressel have a track record of developing good defenses. And now that they've logged some time, of course, last year with their scheme, and now this year with their new personnel, it's really starting to gel together, and it's really starting to look really good in Madison, Wisconsin. This is a defense that has allowed just 16 points over the last 3 games. Look, I understand some people might say Purdue, Rutgers, and Northwestern, but Wisconsin performed better in those games against those teams than teams that a lot of other people think has better defenses than Wisconsin's. Looking at you, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. The Purdue games and the Rutgers games, Wisconsin has far outplayed Nebraska both on defense and on the offensive side of the ball against common opponents. And I think another reason why that this offense is turning the corner is because the offense is figuring out who they are. Phil Longo is figuring out what works. Tawi Walker, that's what works for this Badgers team. He is becoming one of the Big Ten's best running backs and most productive running backs right now. And when he's able to get that ground game going, that opens things up for Braden Locke throwing the football. Vinny Anthony has stepped up into a bigger role. Although he didn't have that big of a game against Northwestern, Trech Kekahuna is certainly stepping up into a bigger role. This Wisconsin offense really starts to do well when that run game gets going, and then you get that play action game, that RPO game, the middle of the field really opens up for Braden Locke. Now, when you look at Braden, he's turned the football over, I think it was 6 times over the last 3 games. He's thrown at least 1 interception in each of these games during this stretch. So he needs to clean up that part of his game. Look, I think he's a solid quarterback. Is he a good quarterback? Is he a great quarterback? Certainly not. But there are parts to Braden's game where it's like, ooh, that's good. Ooh, that's good. There are peaks in his game, but maybe it does come back down with some of these turnovers and some of this decision-making into some of these valleys right now for the Wisconsin Badgers. Folks, I am going to get chills saying this right now and talking about this. This is an opportunity, an awesome opportunity this Saturday for Luke Fickell and the Wisconsin Badgers, a team that's feeling really good right now, hosting the 3rd-ranked Penn State Nittany Lions. The difference between Camp Randall Stadium when the sun is out and when it starts to get dark outside is the difference. It's a night and day difference between a day atmosphere and a night atmosphere at Camp Randall. And folks, it is Halloween weekend in Madison. Things are going to be freaky. It is going to be electric in Camp Randall Stadiums. You don't get many chances like this if you're the Wisconsin Badgers to play the 3rd-ranked team in the country at night, at home. I think that this could be a very competitive game, and I am excited to see if Wisconsin can play great on the big stage against a really good top Big Ten football team. Let's finish things up by talking about a coach that used to coach at Wisconsin, that being Brett Bielema, who's doing an outstanding job this season for the Illinois Fighting Illini. And I think this 2024 season is the best coaching job that Brett Bielema may have ever done. Yes, that includes 3 Big Ten championship seasons when he was at Wisconsin there in the early 2010s. And then you look when in his tenure at Illinois, you look to that 2022 season where you had Chase Brown, where you had Devin Witherspoon, where you had Sidney Brown, you had Johnny Newton on the defensive line. Like, there was some really good talent on that team, and that was an Illinois team. That was just Brett Bielema's 2nd year. For Brett to get them to that point, to have a chance to play for the Big Ten championship, that was certainly really good. But as I said, they had some NFL quality players on that team, and then they took a step down in 2023. And for him to reboot this team, to get this team to a 6-1 level through 7 games with this schedule so far, I think is a testament to what Brett Bielema is, and that being a great football coach, and him being put on this earth to do one thing and one thing only, and that's coach Big Ten football. Because I think one thing that really there's a couple of things that really stand out for this year's coaching job for Brett Bielema is the development, first of all, of this offense, specifically Luke Altmaier. Let's not forget, when Luke Altmaier got hurt last year, the legend John Paddock stepped in, and he looked maybe the guy that should have been starting this whole time. You look back to the beginning of the year last year, it was mostly Luke Altmaier's legs that were producing offense when number 9 was quarterbacking this offense. And now both Brett Bielema and Barry Lunny Jr. to get Luke Altmaier playing as comfortable and as confident as he is playing right now, that's a testament to this coaching staff and the development that they've had with Luke Altmaier within this offensive system. How about a guy like Pat Bryant out on the outside? We were all talking about, myself included, we were all talking about Zachary Franklin as that difference maker on the perimeter, but it's been Pat Bryant that has continued to develop throughout his Illinois career, and now he's sitting there as the top receiver on this Illinois team. And then what about the defense? There were big-time questions coming into the season about what this defense was going to be. Now, the defense had a bad half against Purdue. There were some injuries in that specific game where they were maybe a little bit shorthanded, but no excuses right? We don't want to have any excuses for this team. But overall, I think the defensive line has come in and they've played really good football above expectations. And you got to credit the coaching staff for going out and finding the right guys to plug into this system, to plug in this defensive line. And then you look at the secondary, which wasn't all that great last year. And you've got Matthew Bailey back there, and you've got Xavier Scott back there. This whole defense has really gelled together, and it's played really well. Brett Bielema and how he's built this team and how he's developed this team from the disappointment of 2023 might be, we'll see what happens the rest of the year, but it just might be the best coaching job of his career. And that is certainly saying something. Week 8, a lot of stuff and a lot of narratives to take away from Week 8 in the Big Ten. You know we're going to have stuff to take away from Week 9 of the Big Ten. I want to hear all your thoughts on all of these reactions from week number 8. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.